So you know when you go buy a new piece of gear and you test it out, whatever the results of that test were, it's going to have a lasting impression of your future experiences with that gear. Because every time you use it, your brain just subconsciously, it's looking for that confirmation bias of your initial experience. Well, I don't know about you, but that happens to me enough that I've actually become aware of it. So anytime I'm testing out gear, I need to set up a controlled test so that my own confirmation biases don't skew the results. So the first reflection filter that I ever bought was this SE reflection filter. And it was kind of expensive for what it is, but you know, everyone's using them and I read about them online and my room acoustics weren't that great, so I had to do something, so I gave it a shot. But I guess I was a little bit disappointed with it because, well, my recordings didn't suddenly sound like $1 million studio, and I was kind of hoping they would. And as a matter of fact, my initial experience, I couldn't even tell if it was doing anything at all. So I did some crude tests, just recording myself into the microphone with and without the isolation shield. And after listening to it, I actually came to the conclusion that it was making the recordings worse, not better. There was a little bit of a weirdness to the sound. I couldn't pinpoint what it was, but I didn't like it. Now that was 20 years ago, and I guess I've learned a few things since then, so I'm going to share some of them with you. So let's talk about the behavior of sound a little bit. Whenever sound hits an object, there's 4 things that it can do. And it's not going to do just one of those 4 things. It's usually going to do a little bit of all 4 of them. So those 4 things that it can do is 1, if it can, it'll just go right around the object, bypass it completely. 2 is go through the object. 3 is reflect off the object. And then 4 is it'll go into the object and be absorbed. Here, I'll explain these in a little more detail. So the first one was go around the object. So sound wants to take the path of least resistance. So if it can just go around the object, it will. And whether or not it can is determined by the size of the object in relationship to the wavelength of the sound. So wavelength is frequency, and lower frequencies have a longer wavelength. And if the wavelength is a lot larger than the object, it'll just go right around the object. For instance, if you've ever been to a beach and you see the big waves coming in, if you put your hand in the water, your hand isn't going to reflect that wave because those waves are a very low frequency with a long wavelength compared to the size of your hand. So those waves are just going to go right around your hand. Now, given the size of these reflection filters, it's my estimation that sound that's about 200 hertz, so 200 hertz is roughly 6 feet, give or take a bit. That's a wavelength that's like bigger than that. That would be about half the wavelength. And so a wave that size, I think it'll just bypass that reflection filter completely. So number 2 is go through the object. So materials that are really porous or really low density have a tendency of allowing sound to just pass right through. An example of this is like the pink fluffy insulation. It hardly does anything to the sound that goes into it. Most of that sound just goes right through. A little bit gets absorbed, but most of it goes through. None of it gets reflected. And because it doesn't offer much of an obstruction, sound doesn't really go around it. It doesn't need to because it can just go right through it. Number 3 is reflect off of the object. Now, this is the opposite of going through. See, going through is materials that are really low density and porous. So the opposite is materials that are high density and not porous. And sound that hits these will just reflect right off of it. Examples of this are like concrete and glass. And 4 is sound can go into an object and be absorbed. So I was talking about density, right? Low density goes through, high density reflects off, but in between those 2 density ranges are like, we'll just say medium density materials, that these materials are too dense that the sound can't go right through, but they're not dense enough for the sound to reflect. So the sound enters and gets absorbed. Now within this density range that absorbs sound, there's low, medium, and high density, and they have different properties of how they absorb sound. But these reflection filters use a pretty thin layer of absorption. It's only like half an inch or so. But in terms of sound absorption, it's in the range of higher density materials, which means it's also going to be a little bit more reflective, especially in the higher frequencies. So when sound hits an object, it's not just going to do one of these 4 properties. It usually does a blend of all 4 of them, but it'll do some more than others. So with these reflection filters, sound waves that are about 200 hertz and lower will just go right around it unobstructed. Some of the mid-range frequencies are going to hit that material and get absorbed, and some of the higher frequencies are going to reflect right off of it. Now with room acoustics, when it comes to preserving sound quality, reflections are the enemy. For instance, if you're in an anechoic chamber, so there's no reflections at all, and you got your microphone set up there and you're recording, the sound that the microphone picks up will be the pure uncolored signal right from the source, because there's no reflections that'll interfere and change those sound waves. And then in your DAW, if you want, you can add reverb or room modeling, and in that case, it'll actually sound really similar to the room being modeled. See, if you're recording in an untreated room and you're getting all those reflections, and then you add your room modeling, well, the room modeling goes on top of the room sound that's already being picked up by the microphone. So when reflections come back to the microphone, specifically early reflections, it causes comb filtering, and that colors the sound in a bad way. It'll make it sound a little distant, kind of muddy, and low fidelity. And the problem with these reflection filters is that the shape is concave, so any sound that is reflected off of them is going to converge into a focal point, and you've got your microphone sitting in that focal point. That's exactly how a satellite dish works, to converge reflections into one point. Now with these isolation filters, the high frequencies that are reflecting are converging into one point right where the microphone is. And so that microphone is getting bombarded with early reflections from the high frequencies. So let's take a look at some of the tests I did and see if we can hear this in action. The first test I did, I recorded a vocalist in a well-treated space with and without the shield.
You make me laugh like no one else can. You make me smile like no one else has. And I get so weak in the knees every time you're looking at me.
So in this test, I actually didn't hear a difference. So that kind of threw my hypothesis out the window. But let's try a space that has really bad acoustics and see if it makes an improvement.
You make me laugh like no one else can. You make me smile like no one else has. And I get so weak in the knees every time you're looking at me.
Now, once again, I couldn't say decisively one was better than the other. Now, this time I did hear a difference. With the shield, there's a little bit less echo, but I wouldn't say it sounded better. Let me know in the comments if you were able to hear any difference, but for me, this test was inconclusive. So let's do a controlled test. So I set up a little speaker in here so that I can play an identical vocal take from the identical spot. And then I turned on the bathroom fan to see if the reflection filter would improve the signal-to-noise ratio.
I didn't know that life's just everybody asking what it's all about.
Okay, so the reflection filter didn't seem very effective at reducing that background noise. I think it did reduce it just a really little bit, but not enough to be worthwhile. Now let's listen to the clean vocal.
I didn't know that life's just everybody asking what it's all about. I didn't know that life's just everybody asking what it's all about.
So this time I could definitely hear a clear difference in the high frequencies. The recording without the shield had clearer and more detailed high frequencies. And when the shield was used on the microphone, those high frequencies, they were lost a little bit and they became a little bit dull. So overall, I don't think these reflection filters were very beneficial. Really, the only way to make an improvement in your acoustics is to actually improve your room acoustics. I know that might not be what you wanted to hear because putting up room treatment's a little bit more involved than just buying a simple little reflection filter, but I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to set you down the wrong path. If you want good acoustics, you got to treat your room or record in a room that just naturally has good acoustics. As a general rule, the bigger the space, the better the acoustics will be and less treatment is needed. A smaller space is going to have naturally worse acoustics and need more treatment. But the good news is putting up room treatment actually isn't that hard, but you got to kind of know what you're doing because I see a lot of people put up treatment that, don't get me wrong, like it helps. Putting up treatment wrong is still better than no treatment at all. But if you want to get your acoustics up to a professional level, like say your acoustics right now, they're down here, and a professional studio, you need to be up here. If you just put up a bunch of panels randomly, like that might get you somewhere in the middle, but it might not get you to that really high level of professional quality. To get to that really top level, especially in a home studio, you got to do it right. I want to make it clear that yes, it totally is possible to make the acoustics of your home studio sound just as good as a big professional studio. You just have to know how. So because there's not a lot of resources out there, I created a course specifically for home studios to teach you everything you need to know to get really, really good acoustics and save money. Having really good room acoustics, it's not like buying a new microphone or a new audio interface or preamps or something like that. All that gear, like I've found, it only makes a small difference. But when you get really good room acoustics, that makes a huge difference and your recordings are instantly going to improve a lot. So if you want to learn more about my course on room acoustics, I put the link in the description so you can check it out. So in conclusion, these reflection filters don't actually improve the sound that's being recorded. They do make a difference though. They reduce the room ambience just a little bit, but then they also reduce the clarity of the high frequencies a little bit. But if you're recording music, those high frequencies are critical if you want to get like that modern pop airy sound. And I actually have a video right here that'll teach you how to get that modern pop airy sound. But basically, it's got a lot to do with those high frequencies, and these reflection filters just suck the life right out of those high frequencies. So if you liked this video, then please do me a small favor and hit that like button, because that's what it's there for. And if you want to see my other videos, you can check out my channel and hit subscribe.